Imagine waking up in a freezing cave and realizing the fire is gone. No glowing coals, no smoke, no second chance. Outside, it's completely dark. Predators may be nearby, the temperature is dropping, and nobody has a lighter or a box of matches. For some ancient humans, losing a fire wasn't just uncomfortable. It could turn a safe camp into a death trap. So how did they keep one small fire alive through an entire night? And what happened if it went out? Fire gave ancient humans something almost no other animal could control. It provided warmth during cold nights, light inside dark shelters, a way to cook food, and a place where the group could gather after sunset. Smoke may also have helped drive away insects, while the flames made some predators more cautious about approaching the camp. But there was one enormous problem. A fire constantly eats its own fuel. Stop feeding it, and sooner or later, it dies. So keeping fire alive began long before nightfall. Before the sun went down, members of the group likely searched for fuel. Not just random branches, they needed dry grass, bark, or small twigs that caught fire quickly, along with thicker pieces of wood that burned much more slowly. Wet wood produced heavy smoke and was difficult to ignite. Rotten wood burned too quickly. Good firewood had to be dry enough to burn, but thick enough to last. But how much wood would one night require? Probably far more than you'd expect. A small pile beside the fire wouldn't always be enough. The group needed fuel for cooking, warmth, light, and hours of darkness. That meant gathering wood could be a major daily job, especially in cold or treeless environments. Depending on where they lived, ancient people may also have burned available materials such as dry brush, animal bones, or dung. The fuel they chose changed how hot, smoky, and long-lasting the fire became. But even with enough fuel, placing the fire in the wrong spot could fill the entire shelter with smoke. Inside a cave, the center might seem like the obvious place for a fire. But that could be a terrible choice. Without good airflow, smoke could collect around the people trying to sleep. Research at Paleolithic cave sites suggests hearths were sometimes positioned in areas where smoke could escape while useful living space remained breathable. Ancient humans didn't understand airflow through modern science, but experience would have taught them quickly. If everyone started coughing and their eyes began burning, the fire needed to move. Once the hearth was prepared, the fire had to be built in layers. Small, fast-burning material helped the flame grow. Larger branches created a stronger fire. Thick pieces of wood provided the long-lasting coals needed later in the night. The goal probably wasn't to create the largest possible flame. A huge fire would consume fuel too quickly, produce more smoke, and become dangerous inside a shelter. The real goal was control. And here's the surprising part: the flame itself wasn't the most important thing. The real treasure was underneath it. The embers. A bed of hot coals could remain alive long after the visible flames became small. If protected and given occasional fuel, those embers could last for hours. This meant ancient humans didn't necessarily need a roaring fire all night. They needed a stable core of heat. A few carefully placed pieces of wood could burn slowly while the glowing coals waited underneath. But someone still had to notice when the fire was getting too weak. So did ancient humans have a night watch? Archaeology can't tell us exactly who stayed awake or how they divided the job. But it's reasonable that someone waking during the night could check the hearth, move the coals together, and add another piece of fuel. The responsibility may have passed between different people, especially when the group faced cold weather or nearby predators. And the person caring for the fire had to maintain a difficult balance. Too little air killed it. Too much fuel could smother it. A fire needs oxygen, heat, and fuel. Remove any one of those, and it goes out. Packing branches too tightly could block the airflow. Spreading the embers too far apart could make them lose heat. Adding damp wood could bury the hot coals beneath smoke and moisture. So the firekeeper had to read the hearth. The color of the embers, the strength of the smoke, and the sound of burning wood, each offered a clue. This wasn't luck, it was practical knowledge learned through observation and repeated experience. But what if a strong wind suddenly entered the cave? One blast could scatter sparks into dry bedding or dead grass. Now the group had the opposite problem. Instead of saving the fire, they had to stop it from spreading. A controlled hearth may have been surrounded by bare ground or stones, although hearth designs varied widely across time and place. Fire protected the camp, but it could also burn skin, destroy tools, fill the shelter with smoke, or set nearby material on fire. Their greatest protection was also one of their greatest dangers. When the group finally slept, the fire probably became smaller. That wasn't necessarily a failure. A low fire consumed less wood while its coals continued producing heat. Ash could partly cover the embers, reducing the amount of oxygen reaching them and slowing combustion. The goal was not to bury them completely, but to help them remain hot without burning through all the fuel too quickly. By morning, the hearth might look almost dead. Gray ash on top, no visible flames, but underneath, a few red coals could still be alive. Then came the most important test. Could they bring it back? Someone could gather the surviving embers together and place dry tinder or thin twigs close to them. Gentle airflow would raise the heat. A thin line of smoke appeared first. Then a tiny flame. That single flame meant warmth, cooked food, light, and another day without having to start over. Because using fire and creating fire from nothing were not always the same skill. And for much of human prehistory, that difference may have been crucial. Archaeologists have found evidence of controlled fire stretching back roughly a million years, including burned plant material and bones deep inside South Africa's Wonderwork cave. At Gesher Benat Yaakov in modern-day Israel, burned materials found in repeated concentrations suggest humans controlled fire around 790,000 years ago. But evidence that ancient humans could reliably create a new fire on demand appears much later and remains debated. Some groups may have been skilled firemakers. Others may have depended heavily on fires they already possessed. So what happened if their final ember died? The honest answer is that we don't know exactly. Depending on the time, place, and people, they might have created sparks by striking suitable stones, used a friction method, obtained fire from another group, or waited until they encountered a natural fire. But if they couldn't produce it immediately, losing the hearth would have been a serious setback. Food stayed raw, darkness arrived earlier, cold became more dangerous. That's why a glowing ember could be more valuable than any single tool they owned. Fire may even have been transported when the group moved. Instead of starting from zero at every new camp, people could carry a slowly smoldering material or preserve live embers long enough to reach their next shelter. Exactly how early humans did this is difficult to prove, because containers, bark, wood, and other organic materials rarely survive for hundreds of thousands of years. But carrying fire would have transformed movement. The group wasn't simply transporting heat. They were carrying a piece of their home through a dangerous landscape. So ancient humans didn't keep fire alive by feeding it giant logs every few minutes. They survived by preparing before dark, collecting the right fuel, choosing a safe hearth location, controlling airflow, protecting the coals, and passing fire knowledge from one generation to the next. The most important part of the fire wasn't the bright flame everyone could see. It was the tiny ember hidden underneath the ash, because as long as that ember stayed alive, the group still had warmth, food, light, and protection. Today, starting a fire can take just one click, but for ancient humans, keeping one alive may have required hours of work, careful planning, and constant attention. One careless night could make it disappear, and in a world filled with cold, darkness, and predators, the difference between a dead fire and one glowing coal could be the difference between life and death.